Welcome to Running on Ice, the coolest community in freight. I'm your host, Mary O'Connell, bringing you the latest tech updates, warehouse news, and everything happening in the cold chain world. Not only is there the coolest show in freight, but there's Running on Ice, a newsletter that could not be colder. You can subscribe to that on freightwaves.com/runningonIce. Today, we are welcoming Tim McClatchy, Head of Life Sciences at Kenco. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Hey, Mary, appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
I am excited about today. This is something pretty much anytime I get a chance to talk about pharma, I will, because it is the one thing I truly don't know the most about. Transporting food, perishable things, I've got a pretty good handle on. But pharma is so weird and complicated and complex that I feel like every time I talk to someone about it, I learn something new. So I'm excited to get into that today. But before we get too far, let's get some background on you and how you got started at Kenco.
Sure. No, I appreciate it. So I've been in life science logistics for almost 25 years with some various companies. Worked for a company called Cryoport, selling actually specialized packaging just for the pharmaceutical industry. Did some sales leadership with Thermo Fisher and their division, Fisher Clinical, and then spent a long time in DHL. Various roles through their different business units, global roles, looking at, managing not only the pharmaceutical supply chain, but also the med device supply chain. Came to Kenco about two and a half years ago. Kenco's been in life sciences for over 2 decades, but they really wanted to be laser focused, invest more in the vertical because they know how critical it is to everybody else. And that's where I'm here today.
I absolutely love that because, like you said, it's one thing if your strawberries fall out of temperature. They're gonna rot. They're gonna go to waste a little faster, but ultimately, you can still probably eat those strawberries if they fell out of temperature. However, on the pharmaceutical and the life sciences side, if something falls out of temperature, that's literally the difference between something being usable or someone potentially dying. And that, I think, is why I always make this joke in logistics of it's not life or death. It's really not. Because back when I used to ship agriculture, I was like, no one's going to die if a bag of seed gets there tomorrow. But no, in pharmaceuticals, someone literally might. And so that's why I am always so fascinated by it, because it's such high stakes for logistics, which I didn't even know was a thing.
Yeah, it's funny. So that we actually had a customer last week and they said, you patient missed one of our shipments, they get a little sick. They missed the second one, they get a little bit sicker. They missed the third one, they actually do die. So yeah, it's not your iPad. It's not, your book from Amazon. You really need to make sure that you know what you're doing, and whoever your logistics partners are, know what they're doing.
Yeah, that's where that carrier compliance and everyone is the ultimate, the most important, because it's not just, see, it'll get there tomorrow. It's no, someone might not be there tomorrow to receive it.
Exactly.
So one of the things that you guys have recently done is Kenco has partnered with Qpharma. Can you guys do you mind elaborating on kind of why this partnership came about and what made you guys choose to partner with Qpharma?
Sure. No, absolutely. So, one of the things that we're trying to do at Kenco is to continue to expand our capabilities and our services within the vertical. And so, Qpharma has a lot of different services. One of the things they specialize is sample management. So for those that don't know, sample management is, your doctor wants to put you on a new drug. A lot of times he will give you samples of that drug to see how you react and see if it makes sense. Now, I worked with Qpharma in a previous company, a previous role, so knew them. And the other thing that's important to Kenco as we partner with people is we want to partner with folks that have great brands in the industry. And Qpharma has that great brand, that great recognition in the industry. But in order for Kenco to get into sample management, we can do the fulfillment piece of it, but there's compliance on the front and back end, making sure, for example, the doctor actually has a license, for one. And so we don't have those capabilities in-house. Having worked with Qpharma in the past. I had some conversation, and they do a little bit of fulfillment, but again, it's mainly around the compliance side of sample management. And it was just a natural fit. The other thing is, there are some players that are getting out of sample management. So there's a little bit of a void, in the industry. So it was just a win for not only us, for Qpharma, but also our current customers.
I think that, obviously you love it when people happen to leave and then you just happen to have the solution that can magically fix it, or can magically replace it. But also, that compliance thing I think is something that's often kind of not necessarily overlooked, but almost taken for granted a lot in that life sciences supply chain, because someone has to do it. Like you said, someone has to make sure that, there is a valid license for that doctor, and you have to make sure that, things haven't gone outside of temperature, or that they were produced in a facility that is actually held up to FDA standards. Because you don't want, I know here in St. Louis many years ago, there was a pharmaceutical company that was putting too much of something in a dosing, or pills were sticking together. And so having that end of compliance and kind of that thing of just like a quick double check is, to me, one of the kind of the unsung hero parts of the supply chain.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that, most people don't realize, what's happening behind the scenes. They just know they go to their pharmacy or they go to their doctor and their prescription is ready and it's there. But to your point, they need to have that, peace of mind, right? That it's not only the right dose, but it's in the right condition, for them to go ahead and take it.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that, like we say, we in all parts of the supply chain, quality assurance, I think, is always taken for granted. And, I'm glad that you guys saw that and said, no, we're actually going to take it seriously. And this is our solution for it. And it could arguably be one of the better solutions in supply chain.
No, it's all about compliance. Most 3PLs, if they're not, they shouldn't be in the vertical, right? But you have to be thinking compliance first.
Yeah, and especially in the life sciences one, where it's one thing if, you're moving automotive, like compliance is there, but it's not as like to the letter, and there's not as many regulations for it. So I guess one of the things that you bring to your customers obviously is this added compliance benefit. Are there any additional kind of benefits that, Kenco is expecting their customers to take advantage of now that you do have this partnership?
Yeah, so one of the advantages of working with Qpharma, there are not a lot of fulfillment houses out there that do both commercial distribution and sample distribution. There's a few, but not many. A lot of times you're either just doing commercial distribution, which Kenco was doing before this partnership, or purely just sample distribution. So, a lot of our customers, as you hear of cutbacks, or layoffs, in the industry, their supply chain departments are getting smaller. So, one of the opportunities is now they can manage less suppliers. So, for example, previously, if they're going with, say, Kenco for commercial distribution and someone else for sample management, they've got 2 QA audits of the different facilities. They've got business reviews. They've got contracts. There's just a lot of duplicate activities. So one, by having everything under one roof, right? It's easier if you're going to have a lean supply chain department, to just organize because you have less suppliers. Then there's also cost savings. So before we worked with this partnership with Qpharma, we actually had some of the product in-house. And because we couldn't handle it, we would then truck it to different sample management homes or supply chains. Now our customers can keep that in-house. So you've got truckload savings, annually that'll help. And then lastly, the other thing that Qpharma does, which is interesting, they do a lot of go-to-market strategies on the marketing side, with pharmaceutical companies, because that's really where samples fit in, right? It's part of a marketing strategy for the pharmaceutical companies. Well, now you can really tie in your marketing strategy along with your supply chain strategy. So, say okay, I want to target these doctors as part of my marketing strategy or these hospitals. Well, let's marry that up then with the supply chain strategy. And, if you've got some doctors or hospitals that are on the outer edge of your marketing strategy, then maybe you look at the supply chain costs and say, okay, does it make sense or does it not make sense? So again, really looking at your complete strategy, not only marketing, but distribution for a pharmaceutical company.
I think that is incredibly helpful because, like you said, more often than not, supply chain does take a hit when there are layoffs and other things. And that's obviously not a solution that anybody wants. But to have the people that are there being able to just kind of, like you said, heavily rely on that and say, okay, well, not only can we, do what we can and have all of these solutions over here, but we can also partner with our marketing team and say, okay, well, this is where we want to go next. Does it make sense? And to kind of have more or less kind of like that data to back up that decision pretty readily available.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess we kind of just touched on it a little bit, but how do you kind of see this partnership evolving into the future? Do you see it kind of being, I mean, obviously it's going to be one of the top solutions, but do you see it kind of elevating everyone else and forcing everyone else to, for lack of a better comparison, bring up their game as well?
Well, I think what'll be interesting is you do have a few companies out there that's all they do is sample management, right? And so, I think they need to think about it from a business strategy perspective. If their customer wants ease of use, are they going to go to someone that is just a niche player versus someone that can do both commercial and sample distribution, right? So I think it's really going to force, those folks to think about their strategy. Same thing on some of the 3PLs that just do commercial distribution and they don't want to get into sample management. Again, the pressure is not only under the 3PLs, but as we all know, pressure's under the healthcare as a whole in the U.S., right? Everybody wants lower cost to their healthcare. Now, why it's not a big piece, logistics does play a small piece. So if we can help bring a more cost-effective, compliant solution that others are bringing, I mean, I think others would at least have to think about and see what happens with this partnership and then maybe pivot off their current strategy.
I think that is 1,000% the case because as we move into the future of pharmaceuticals, which, as we are able to thankfully cure more and more diseases and have some of those more unique, healthcare solutions. I mean, it seems like every other day there's a new clinical trial coming out with like a customized gene therapy, and it's something truly customized to the patient, which obviously then is more expensive and it has much higher supply chain costs and much more strict parameters about its shipping. But I think anywhere that a company is able to more or less kind of, I don't want to say like cut costs, but have significant cost savings and have a strong procedure already in place, I think is going to offset kind of the demands that come from some of those newer therapies that are, personalized to each person.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's the world has changed, right? And there's a lot of different things going on with the vertical, and cost is people are now getting very sensitive, to that, and we've got to try to do something, different. I mean, I actually read an article where within the next 10 years, 20% of the hospitals are probably going to close in the U.S. And so their cost structure is changing. So then they're asking their partners, the manufacturers, to do something different. So I think the biggest thing, whether it's what we're doing with Qpharma or not, status quo isn't going to work anymore, right? We all have to think about how we can do things differently to then enhance the patient experience. And, that's cost included.
Yeah, and that's something that I've seen some pretty cool solutions actually come out about, and that's whether there's like a kit that they can send you at home for testing, or getting more people through the healthcare system, but in a more approachable way. That whether it's, I can send you a box at home in a kit and you can send me back a blood sample, or, I can have a provider go out to a more rural area, collect a bunch of samples, and, service more people, which, I mean, personally, I'm all for everyone being able to get the healthcare that they need. But it's one of those where there is that fine line that they have to walk between, servicing everyone, but also still, making money, because unfortunately, we don't have we can't just have hospitals not make money.
Yeah, I mean, that's so. I mean, that's one of the big trends in the industry, right? Is more personalized medicine, more at home medicine. So, especially for some chronic diseases. So, for example, diabetes. You're not going to cure diabetes, at least from my knowledge. But it's how can you give whoever has diabetes more independence, right? And that's really the same thing with all of the chronic diseases. Is you may not cure it, but you want to create more independence, right? A better lifestyle for the patient. And so, it is more rural deliveries. It is more, even if it's not a rural area, how do you know that it's being delivered in the right condition at the right time? I mean, I have dogs, right? My delivery guys, Amazon, UPS, FedEx, they get nervous, so they leave it certain places, right? Well, if it's a drug, is that in the right place? And so there's all kinds of challenges that we're having to deal with as a society. So the positive thing is, we're creating much more independence for the patient, right, than we did even 5 years ago. But we have to, as a logistics industry, figure out, how to get that done. So again, it's safe, right? So that your mom or dad or your son or daughter are taking the drug and you're confident that it's compliant.
Yeah, and that's, I think, one of the biggest hurdles. There are some cool solutions out there, but obviously with any new solution, there is a cost associated with them. So while, it does make things easier for the patient, is the cost of that machine that's potentially a couple $1,000s to have in circulation. Does the cost of that fall on the hospital? Does it fall on the patient? Does it fall on the insurance? Because it's one of those where at the end of the day, someone's got to pay that bill. But I do love, from like a patient aspect, I do love the fact that there is more customized care, and that, maybe someone who has a chronic illness and their primary doctor is in Texas and they live in Michigan, like the fact that they don't have to uproot their life and move completely to Michigan. They can send samples or whatever. I don't know. I do like that part, but it is one of torn where it's like, it does put more strain on the supply chain. And if you already have so many people that are struggling to get through and track what they do have in the network, it's one of those where it's like, well, can we just add one more without killing you completely?
Well, I mean, it goes back to another trend that's in the industry, right? And so from a patient perspective, we all have more data. So we can create more personalized solutions and maybe actually have more prevention, right? So you don't have those diseases. So for example, I'm wearing an Apple Watch, right? So that tracks all type of data. And that's just one example. Logistics is the same way. It's how can we use data, right, to help with the solution. So for example, weather is an issue. So how can we use predictive analytics to understand where the storm is hitting? And it's not perfect, right? It may or may not hit, as we know. But we can make better decisions based on the data, we have. Same thing is, in the four walls, using data to understand, hey, Mr. Customer, most of your orders are placed between 3 and 5, and it's really pushing the supply chain to then get it out the door to whoever the carrier is. Is there any way that we can use that data to say, hey, how can you go back to your sales or customer service so we can spread that out earlier, right? And then maybe we can use a different solution that's maybe more reliable or, maybe more cost effective, rather than we're all panicking because we get 90% of the orders between 3 and 5 and the FedEx cutoff is 6 o'clock.
But I was going to say, one of those solutions is definitely not, hey, FedEx, can you just pick up 2 hours later? Because that's how they'll just laugh as they hang up on you.
Yeah, I mean, so I've done the small parcel with DHL, right? And it's a network, right? So you can't change the network, right? It's a hub, and you've got cutoffs, and there's certain things you can work around, and there's certain things you can't work around. But yeah, so I mean, one of the things that Kenco has done is, we're diving and investing a lot into data analytics. You know, for example, one tool is to understand, hey, if you keep your order profile the way it's going, the warehouse will be out of capacity in 3 months based on the data. So we either need to then change, the inventory patterns, or do we need an overflow facility? Um, Same thing when you're looking at different places in the US to have a facility. It's looking at where are the tax advantages, using the data around labor, right? Where's the labor rate? Also, how can marry autom- automation along with labor, right? It's the combination of both. I mean, I don't think we'll ever have a warehouse where it's 100%, automated. Jobs are changing. Maybe you're having less pickers, but you're having more, technical folks. Um, but again, it's using data, and data will help you understand what that balance is. So it's one area where, we're investing a lot in. Every year we invest in more data scientists. And with customers, actually what we do is we say, hey, let's create a workshop. You folks bring your data scientists. We'll bring our data science. And so we can understand what points make sense for you folks, right? What data points do you folks need? And then, because the end goal is, how can we make better decisions to, enhance the patient experience? And so at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you're a manufacturer, a carrier, a 3PL. The focus should be, how can we enhance that patient experience?
And that's something that I love personally as a patient. But also, more importantly, I've long since said that, there's a lot of answers in data. It's just a matter of, you can have all of the best data analysis tools in the world, but until you have someone sit there and come up with an actionable plan off of that data, you've just paid a lot for a very pretty machine. So I love that that is something that you guys do take seriously and say, hey, like this, like we're putting our money where our mouth is. We have someone to sit here to collect this data and interpret and come up with an actionable plan for it. Because honestly, I love it, because also no one really wants to be like, we're going to start this whole thing and then, oh, a hurricane comes tomorrow. Like that's something that you can predict, but also you can't predict, but you can have backup plans in place for it.
Yeah, it's never foolproof, right? But if you use it the right way, and if you have that collaboration with your customer, you can make better business decisions.
Oh, 1,000%. But that being said, we are running out of time today. And Tim, there's a question that everyone that comes on the show has to answer, and you, sir, are no exception. It could potentially be the hardest question you've been asked all day. Are you ready for it?
I'm ready.
Is cereal considered a soup?
So yeah, so that's an interesting question. Um, I would personally say no. I'm not a big cereal guy to begin with, so I'll throw that out there. Because I'm trying to cut down on the sugar, right? Trying to do the health thing. But no, except for gazpacho, I'm not sure I know of any cold soups. So I would have to vote on the no side.
I am also team cereal is not a soup, but again, to each his own. Soups are typically more savory, and there's like a breakfast cereal is a little more sweeter. Um, I don't really know of like a sweet Lucky Charms soup, but I'm sure there's some somewhere.
No, to your point, each his own. But yeah, I think I'd be interested to see what the poll is. But I would think that the answer no is probably leading.
It is the leading one. I don't have the exact stats behind it, but it is leading the poll. But we have had some yeses, which is scary. All right. So if anyone wants to reach out about your cereal soup opinions, or kind of anything about the life sciences supply chain, where can they find you outside the show?
Yeah, a couple places. So one, I'm very active on LinkedIn. So Tim McClatchy on LinkedIn, and then email is tim.mcclatchy@thekencogroup.com.
Fantastic. You guys heard it here first. Tim's DMs are open, so I suggest you slide into them. Thanks so much for being on the show, Tim.
Appreciate it, Mary. Definitely appreciate the conversation.
You can catch other episodes of Running on Ice right here on FreightWaves TV, YouTube, or anywhere else you get your podcasts like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Need more Running on Ice news? No sweat. Subscribe to the newsletter on freightwaves.com/runningonIce. See you on the internet.